As we prepare to delve into the annals of ancient history, take a moment to settle in your favorite resting place. Close your eyes, let your consciousness drift, and allow your mind to be transported back to the era of the Roman Empire, a civilization known for its remarkable advancements, vast territories, and interestingly peculiar legal systems. Our journey begins at the heart of this impressive empire, Rome. In the early days of the Roman Empire, the legal system was heavily influenced by the concept of pater familias, or the male head of the family who held significant power, including the right to life and death over his family members. This authority was not restricted to within the family's walls, it extended to the public sphere as well. The Roman law, as we will see, was a reflection of the society's hierarchy and power structures, with punishments often being as dramatic as the offences themselves. One such severe punishment was poenocule, translated as the punishment of the sack. This punishment was reserved for the most heinous crime in the Roman society, parricide, the act of killing one's parent or close relative. The offender was sewn into a leather sack with a variety of animals, often a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, and then thrown into a river or the sea. The sack represented the domestic sphere where the crime occurred, and the animals were symbolic elements, each representing a specific part of the Roman cosmology and its relationship with the crime committed. This bizarre punishment was not only highly symbolic, but also served as a public spectacle. The Romans believed that this public display of punishment acted as a deterrent, discouraging the population from committing similar crimes. The offender was not simply executed. They were erased from society, their death a theatrical reminder of the consequences of defying Rome's laws and moral standards. Another peculiar punishment involved the Roman army. If a legion were to act in cowardice or misconduct, they would face decimation. This term, derived from the Latin word decimatio, which means removal of a tenth, involved a cruel and unusual form of punishment. The legion would be divided into groups of 10, where each group would draw lots. The unfortunate soldier, who drew the short straw, would then be beaten or stoned to death by his comrades. This brutal punishment served to reinforce discipline, unity, and loyalty within the military ranks, reminding each soldier of their duty to Rome and their comrades. In contrast to these harsh punishments, the Romans also employed psychological tactics to enforce their laws. One such strategy was the infamia, a form of social ostracism. Individuals convicted of certain crimes were branded as infames and stripped of certain legal and social rights. They were usually barred from holding public office, giving public performances, and even appearing in court. This punishment was particularly effective because it targeted the individual's social status, an important aspect of Roman society. As we continue to weave through the labyrinth of Roman law and its eccentricities, we stumble upon the noxi. These were criminals sentenced to the harshest of punishments, death by the beasts in the gladiatorial games. This punishment was not just a death sentence, it was entertainment for the masses. The noxi were often poorly armed, if at all, and sent into the arena to face ferocious beasts. Their death was not just a punishment, but a public spectacle, their fear and agony serving as amusement for the bloodthirsty spectators. These unusual punishments, while seemingly harsh and brutal to us, were an integral part of the Roman legal system. They reflected the Romans' understanding of justice, punishment, and social order. Despite their severity, these punishments were often seen as fair and just, a testament to the Romans' belief in the power and necessity of the law. As we close this section of our exploration into ancient Roman punishments, allow your mind to drift away from the imposing structures of the Colosseum and the grandeur of the Roman courts. Instead, let it wander through the quieter streets of Rome, where the echoes of these bygone punishments have long since faded. Let the calming rhythm of the Roman life lull you into a peaceful slumber as we prepare to uncover more of Rome's rich and complex history in the sections to come. As you drift closer to sleep, remember that the stories of the past can serve as a soothing lullaby for the present, a gentle reminder of the enduring nature of human civilization. Rest now and let the tales of ancient Rome guide you into a tranquil and restful night. In the next section, we will continue our exploration into Rome's most bizarre punishments, delving deeper into the nuances of their legal system. For now, however, let the echoes of the Roman Empire lull you into a peaceful rest, as we bid Rome and its peculiar laws a temporary farewell. As we delve deeper into the annals of Roman history, we encounter some truly fascinating aspects of their judicial system, including their unique approach to punishment. The Romans were known for their strict adherence to the law and the severity of their penalties, which were often designed not only to punish, but also to deter potential wrongdoers. Let's explore some of the more unusual punishments that were prevalent in ancient Rome. One such bizarre punishment was known as the poena culae. This punishment was reserved for individuals found guilty of parricide or the killing of a parent. It was considered one of the most heinous crimes in Roman society, and thus was met with a particularly gruesome penalty. The convicted person was first scourged or whipped, then sewn into a leather sack with a collection of live animals, typically a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The sack was then thrown into a river or the sea. The symbolism behind this unusual punishment was profound and darkly poetic. The variety of animals was believed to represent the diversity of the Roman Empire, and the sack was thought to symbolize the womb from which the parricide had emerged only to betray it. Another unusual punishment was the damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This punishment was often meted out to slaves, criminals, and Christians, who were seen as a threat to the pagan state. These individuals were thrown to wild beasts, usually during public games in the Colosseum. The spectacle was intended to demonstrate the might of the empire and the fate of those who dared to oppose it. The condemned were often left defenseless, adding an extra layer of horror to the spectacle. It was a brutal, terrifying form of public execution, designed to entertain the masses while reinforcing the indomitable power of the Roman state. Moving on, we encounter the decimation. This punishment was reserved for soldiers who showed cowardice or insubordination. The word decimation derives from the Latin decimatio, which means removal of a tenth. The soldiers were divided into groups of 10, and each group was made to draw lots. The unlucky soldier who drew the short straw was then beaten or stoned to death by his comrades. This punishment served two purposes. It instilled fear in the ranks, and it reinforced the importance of camaraderie and loyalty to the Roman army. One more peculiar form of punishment was the furca. A convicted person was forced to carry a forked piece of wood, known as a furca, on their shoulders. Then, they were paraded around the town while being beaten. The humiliation was a significant part of the punishment, as the carrying of the furca was a public admission of guilt. It was a simple yet effective deterrent, as it shamed the guilty person in front of their community. In addition to these physical punishments, the Romans also implemented several psychological punishments. One such punishment was infamia, or disgrace. This was a form of public humiliation, where the guilty person was stripped of their social status and privileges. It was a particularly harsh punishment in a society that placed great importance on honor and reputation. In a similar vein, the Romans also practiced interdictio aquae et ignis, or banishment by water and fire. This punishment involved the exile of an individual from Roman territory. The person was forbidden to use fire or water, which symbolically represented the basic necessities of life. This was essentially a form of social ostracism, which was a severe punishment in a society that valued community and social cohesion. The Romans also practiced servitus poenae, or slave of the penalty. This involved the enslavement of a person as punishment for a crime. The person was stripped of their rights and forced to work without pay. This punishment was often reserved for debtors who were unable to repay their loans. Finally, there was the vallum, a punishment reserved for soldiers who deserted their posts. The soldier was forced to spend a night outside the camp, unprotected from the dangers that lurked in the darkness. This punishment was designed to instill fear and discipline in the ranks of the Roman army. These bizarre punishments offer a glimpse into the complex legal and social structures of ancient Rome. They reflect the Romans' emphasis on discipline, honor, and social order, as well as their penchant for theatricality and spectacle. As we continue our journey through the annals of Roman history, it becomes clear that their approach to justice was as multifaceted and intricate as the empire itself. As we delve deeper into the annals of Roman history, we find ourselves surrounded by the echoes of a long-gone civilization, each stone whispering tales of triumph and tribulation. This section of our journey will focus on a particularly unique, not to mention bizarre, aspect of Roman life: the practice of punitive poena culae, or the penalty of the sack. The poena culae was reserved for a crime considered most heinous by the Romans: parricide. Parricide is the act of killing one's own parent or a close relative, a crime so unthinkable that the Romans devised a punishment equally unsettling in response. In the poena culae, the condemned was sewn into a sack along with a collection of animals. The sack was then cast into a body of water, the Tiber River being the most commonly used in Rome. The animals typically included a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, each carrying its own symbolic significance in this grim tableau. The dog was seen as the guardian of the household and the embodiment of loyalty. Its inclusion in the sack represented the betrayal of these virtues by the perpetrator. The rooster, a bird that heralds the dawn, symbolized the disruption of natural order, as the crime of parricide was seen to go against the law of nature itself. The viper, a poisonous snake, served to represent the venomous act of treachery that parricide was considered to be. Finally, the monkey, a creature often associated with mimicry and mockery in Roman culture, was likely included as a symbol of the unnatural, grotesque inversion of familial relationships that the crime represented. The condemned, sewn into this ghastly menagerie, was then cast into the river, symbolizing their removal from society and their descent into the underworld, a journey from which there was no return. This was not merely a physical punishment, but a spiritual one too, designed to instill fear and enforce order. From our modern perspective, the poena culae might appear excessively brutal and macabre, a reflection of a time when justice was more about retribution than rehabilitation. Yet, for the Romans, it was a fitting response to a crime they found unimaginably cruel. It's important to note that while the poena culae was a legally sanctioned punishment, it was not frequently used. Parricide was considered such a serious crime that the Romans believed it to be relatively rare. The threat of this punishment, however, served its purpose as a strong deterrent. There's a complexity to the symbolism in the poena culae that offers us a glimpse into the Roman psyche and how they viewed crime and punishment. Each animal, each action taken, was not decided upon lightly, but carried the weight of deep cultural and societal significance. It was a punishment designed not only to remove the criminal from society, but to send a powerful message to those left behind. As we continue our journey through the annals of Roman history, we'll uncover more such tales of how the Romans dealt with transgressions against their societal norms. Each tale is a thread in the rich tapestry of their civilization, a civilization that has shaped and influenced the world in countless ways. While the echoes of the Roman Empire have long since faded, their stories and their practices continue to captivate us, offering us a mirror into a time very different, yet strangely familiar to our own. Rest now, knowing that you've journeyed back in time, walked the ancient streets of Rome, and discovered a piece of history that few have ventured to explore. As we continue our journey back in time, we gently tread into the realm of ancient Rome, a civilization renowned for its grand constructions, varied societal norms, and peculiarities in meting out justice. The Romans, despite their advanced administrative systems, had a knack for bizarre punishments that often served as a form of public entertainment. Let's delve deeper into one such example, a punishment that was particularly strange and terrifying, known as the poena cullae. The poena cullae, or punishment of the sack, was reserved for a crime considered most heinous by the Romans, parricide, the act of killing one's own parents or close relatives. This alarming crime was so unthinkable to the Romans that they devised an equally terrifying punishment to deter potential offenders. The sentenced criminal was placed inside a large leather sack, but they were not alone. The Romans added a collection of live animals to the sack, often a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The idea behind this unusual assortment of animals was deeply symbolic. Each animal represented a different aspect of the chaos and disorder that the crime of parricide brought to the natural order of Roman life. Once the condemned was securely sewn into the sack with the animals, the sack was then thrown into a body of water, usually the Tiber River. The criminal would meet their end at the bottom of the river, unable to escape the sack, the biting, scratching animals, or the suffocating weight of the water. Thus, the offender was denied a proper burial, a fate seen as worse than death itself in Roman culture, where ancestral veneration was of utmost importance. This bizarre punishment sends a shiver down the spine, but it also paints a vivid picture of the Roman civilization's moral and societal values. The Romans believed in public display of punishments as a deterrent for potential criminals. The spectacle of the poena cullae was a graphic reminder to the Romans about the consequences of disrupting societal norms. Yet despite its severity, the poena cullae was not an often employed punishment. Its use was infrequent, possibly due to the perceived severity of the crime it was intended to punish. Parricide was considered such a grave crime that the Romans believed only the most disturbed individuals could commit such an act. Interestingly, the poena cullae was not the original punishment for parricide in Rome. Initially, the offender was simply exiled. However, as Roman society evolved and the moral code became stricter, the punishment for parricide became more severe, ultimately leading to the creation of the poena cullae. Despite the harshness of this punishment, it is important to remember that it was a product of its time and culture. Ancient Rome was a civilization that valued honor, family, and respect for the societal order above all else. The poena cullae was a reflection of those values, a brutal reminder of the consequences of breaking the societal norms. As we leave behind the chilling tale of the poena cullae, we step further into the winding path of Roman history, a path lined with tales of triumph, disaster, compassion, and cruelty. The Rome of antiquity, with its grand Colosseum and bustling marketplaces, its strict moral code, and its often macabre sense of justice, continues to fascinate us, drawing us further into its complex web of stories. So, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind dances with images of a civilization long past, let the echoes of ancient Rome lull you into a peaceful slumber. Dwell not on the harshness of their justice, but rather on their contributions to society, their architectural feats, their literature, and their philosophies. As we close this chapter, we prepare to explore further, to delve deeper into the annals of history, guided by the soft whispers of the past. Let the gentle rhythm of these stories carry you to a world of dreams, leaving behind the weight of the present, if only for a while. Sleep well and dream of a time long past, yet ever present in the echoes of our shared human history. We've journeyed through the early history of Rome and the unique forms of penal systems that developed during that time. Now let's delve a little further into the peculiarities of ancient Rome's punishments. One of the most bizarre forms of punishment in ancient Rome was damnatio ad bestias, a sentence which meant being thrown to the beasts. This was a form of capital punishment where criminals were placed in an arena with wild animals, like lions or bears. The mere mention of this punishment may stir images of the famous Roman Colosseum, a grand structure that played host to these brutal spectacles. The condemned would be left defenseless, their fate sealed in the jaws or claws of these ferocious creatures. The Romans viewed this as a form of entertainment, an unsettling testament to the societal norms of the time. Another unusual punishment was known as decimation. This was a military punishment used for soldiers who displayed cowardice or mutiny. The word decimation is derived from the Latin word decimatio, which means removal of a tenth. In this punishment, a military unit would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would then draw lots to determine which of their number would be executed. The unlucky soldier would then be clubbed or stoned to death by his compatriots. The surviving soldiers would then be forced to live outside the camp and subsist on barley instead of wheat. This form of punishment was as much psychological as it was physical, instilling fear and maintaining discipline within the ranks. For those who committed patricide, murdering one's father, the punishment was known as pena culae. It was considered an act so heinous that a simple execution was not deemed sufficient. Instead, the condemned would be sewn into a leather sack with a variety of animals, typically a dog, a cock, a viper, and a monkey. The sack would then be thrown into a river or the sea, ensuring a slow and terrifying death. This form of punishment was a reflection of society's deep respect for the patriarchal figure and the severity of the crime committed against it. Roman society also had a unique form of punishment and humiliation known as infamia. This was not a physical punishment, but rather a social one. Individuals who committed certain crimes were stripped of their social standing and rights. This included the right to vote, the right to hold public office, and the right to make legal contracts. They were also prohibited from appearing in public without a distinctive mark or dress that signified their lowered status. This form of punishment was particularly harsh in a society that placed a high premium on honor and social standing. One of the more exotic forms of punishment, reserved primarily for those who committed treason, was being forced to commit suicide. This was often the fate of prominent individuals who held high positions in society. The most famous case is perhaps that of the philosopher Seneca, who was accused of conspiracy against Emperor Nero. Seneca was ordered to end his own life and did so by slitting his veins and poisoning himself. This form of punishment allowed the guilty party to die with some semblance of honor rather than being publicly executed. There were also punishments for less serious crimes. For example, thieves were often sentenced to work in the mines, a grueling and dangerous job. Those who committed fraud were usually sentenced to hard labor, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Even petty crimes were met with severe punishments. Vandalism, for example, could result in the offender's hand being cut off. It's clear that the ancient Romans had a broad and often brutal range of punishments for those who stepped out of line. These punishments were designed not only to deter individuals from committing crimes, but also to maintain the strict social order that was vital to the functioning of Roman society. As we continue our journey through the history of ancient Rome's most bizarre punishments, we can observe how these punishments reflect the values and beliefs of the society that implemented them. They serve as a stark reminder of the harsh and often brutal nature of life in ancient Rome. As we move into the next section of our journey, we'll explore some of the less known, but equally peculiar, punishments of this ancient civilization. So, as your eyes grow heavy and your mind starts to wander, let us take you further down the winding path of Rome's history, where we'll uncover more of this fascinating yet brutal aspect of the Roman justice system. As we delve further into the intriguing world of ancient Rome, we now turn our attention to a punishment that might seem oddly familiar, yet its implementation was distinctly Roman in character. This was the punishment of damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This form of execution was famously used as a spectacle, often as part of the grand and bloody gladiatorial games. The Romans, known for their elaborate public spectacles, used this punishment as a form of entertainment. In these events, the condemned were thrown into a large arena filled with wild beasts, mostly imported from Africa. Lions, tigers, bears, and even elephants were used to maul and kill the convicted. The crowd would gather in the massive Colosseum or other amphitheaters, eager to witness the chilling spectacle of man versus beast. The public nature of these events served a dual purpose. Not only did it provide a twisted form of amusement for the masses, but it also acted as a stark warning to those who might consider breaking the law. This punishment was reserved for the lowest of the low in Roman society. Slaves, prisoners of war, and criminals were often the victims of this brutal execution method. But it wasn't just the common folk who could end up as fodder for the beasts. Even high-ranking officials and members of the nobility could find themselves in the arena if they fell out of favor with the emperor. Such was the case with the senator and historian Publius Cornelius Tacitus, who was reputedly sentenced to damnatio ad bestias by Emperor Domitian. However, the historical accuracy of this account is disputed, and some suggest it might have been a political exaggeration. The implementation of this punishment was not always random. Sometimes the types of animals used were chosen deliberately to match the crime. For instance, an arsonist could be sentenced to face a fiery salamander, a symbol of fire in ancient Roman mythology. Similarly, a thief might be thrown to a pack of wolves, symbolic of their predatory and deceitful nature. This added a layer of poetic justice to the punishment, making it not just a spectacle, but also a morality play. But not all who were condemned to the beasts perished in the arena. Some managed to survive and even win their freedom through this cruel form of entertainment. These individuals, known as bestiarii, were often seen as heroes by the Roman public, and their stories were told and retold, adding to the allure of the games. As barbaric as this form of punishment may seem to us now, it was an integral part of Roman society, reflecting their attitudes towards crime and punishment, as well as their love for spectacle and drama. The Romans were not alone in this regard. Many ancient civilizations used public executions as a form of entertainment and control, but few did so with the same flair and grandeur as the Romans. In the next section, we will explore yet another bizarre Roman punishment, one that was reserved for those who committed the most heinous of crimes. But for now, let the image of the Roman Colosseum, filled with the roar of beasts and the cheers of the crowd, lull you into a peaceful slumber. As you drift off, consider the strange dichotomy of an ancient society that could create such magnificent architectural feats and works of art, yet also reveled in such brutal public spectacles. The ancient Romans continue to fascinate us, not just for their achievements, but also for their contradictions. A civilization of such splendor and savagery, all at once, continues to captivate our imaginations, even as we drift into the realm of dreams. As we delve deeper into the annals of Roman history, we find a wealth of information about how the ancient Romans dealt with crime and punishment. Perhaps one of the most intriguing aspects of their judicial system was their penchant for bizarre and unusual punishments. As we continue our journey into this fascinating world, let us focus on the Mos Maiorum, the Way of the Elders, which was the unwritten code from which the ancient Romans derived their social norms. It was these norms that often determined the severity and nature of the punishments meted out to offenders. One of the most bizarre punishments was the poena culae, or the penalty of the sack. This punishment was reserved for those guilty of parricide, the act of killing one's parents or other close relatives. The offender was sewn into a leather sack with a variety of animals, often a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, and then thrown into a body of water. This strange and ghastly punishment was a visceral demonstration of the Romans' deep-seated belief in retributive justice and the sanctity of the family unit. The Romans also practiced decimation, a form of military punishment used during the Republic and early Empire. This method was used as a disciplinary measure against armies or large groups guilty of crimes such as mutiny or desertion. A cohort, typically consisting of around 480 soldiers, would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would then draw lots, and the soldier who drew the shortest would be executed by his comrades. This brutal punishment served to underscore the importance the Romans placed on loyalty, obedience, and duty to the state. Slavery was another tool of punishment in ancient Rome. Slaves who were found guilty of crimes could be subjected to punishments ranging from torture to execution. In addition, free citizens could also be sentenced to slavery, known as servitude. This punishment was particularly harsh as it stripped the individual of their social status and personal rights, effectively reducing them to property. In addition to these brutal physical punishments, the Romans also employed more psychological forms of punishment. One such method was infamia, a form of public humiliation. Those sentenced to infamia were essentially outcast from society, stripped of their public rights, and often their property was confiscated. They were also subjected to public scorn and ridicule, a punishment that was perhaps more damaging in a society that placed a high value on honor and reputation. Another unusual punishment was damnatio memoriae, or condemnation of memory. This punishment was typically reserved for disgraced politicians or those who had committed treason. It involved erasing the person's name from all public records and monuments, effectively erasing them from history. This was a particularly severe punishment in a society that valued legacy and remembrance. The Romans also made use of a punishment known as interdictio aqua et igni, or ban from water and fire. This was essentially a form of exile where the convicted person was not allowed to be within a certain distance of the city's fire or water. This effectively banished them from the city and forced them to live in the wilderness. Whilst many of these punishments may seem harsh, and indeed they were, it is essential to remember that they were part of a broader system of social control and deterrence. The Romans believed that the severity of their punishments acted as a deterrent against crime and social disorder, a belief that has been carried through to many modern penal systems. As we leave behind the darker aspects of Roman justice, it is important to remember that these punishments, as brutal as they may seem, were a reflection of the values and beliefs of the society that created them. In the next section, we will continue to explore the more bizarre aspects of Roman life, shedding light on the customs and practices that have shaped one of history's most influential civilizations. As your eyes grow heavy and your mind slowly drifts off to the rhythmic cadence of Roman history, may you find tranquility in the knowledge that sleep is but a breath away. So, let's journey on into the heart of the ancient world and uncover more of its fascinating, albeit sometimes unsettling, truths. As we continue our journey through the labyrinth of ancient Rome's most bizarre punishments, we find ourselves in the midst of the Roman army. While the general populace had its own peculiar set of punishments, the Roman army was not to be outdone. Discipline within the ranks was strict, and punishments for misdeeds were severe. In the Roman army, one such punishment was decimation. Not to be confused with the modern usage of the word, which implies a large reduction in number, decimation in the Roman context had a very specific and brutal meaning. If a military unit was found to be guilty of severe crimes such as mutiny or desertion, they would be subjected to decimation. The soldiers would be divided into groups of 10 and would then draw lots. The unlucky soldier who drew the shortest lot would be clubbed or stoned to death by the remaining 9. The idea behind this horrific punishment was not just to punish the guilty, but also to instill a deep sense of fear and obedience amongst the ranks. Decimation, while brutal, was not the only form of punishment in the Roman military. Fustuarium was another method employed by the Roman army to maintain discipline. This punishment was meted out for crimes such as stealing, lying, or failing to stand guard properly. The guilty soldier would be beaten to death by his fellow soldiers using clubs, a punishment not dissimilar to decimation, but without the element of chance. Moving away from the military, let us return to the broader society of ancient Rome. One of the most bizarre punishments that the Romans employed was the poena culae. This punishment was reserved for individuals guilty of parricide, the act of killing a parent or close relative. The Romans viewed this as an unthinkable crime, and the punishment was designed to match the severity of the act. The condemned person would be sewn into a leather sack along with a variety of animals, usually a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. This strange collection of creatures was symbolic, each representing a different negative trait. The snake represented evil, the dog symbolized greed, the monkey was a symbol of deceit, and the rooster, often associated with the underworld, represented darkness and death. The sack was then thrown into a river or the sea, leaving the condemned to a dreadful demise. The poena culae was a form of punishment that was designed to be a spectacle, a public demonstration of the consequences of such a heinous act. It was a reminder to the public of the harsh punishments that awaited those who dared to commit such an unthinkable crime. In contrast to the spectacle of the poena culae, the Romans also had punishments that were more discreet, aimed at shaming the guilty party rather than causing physical harm. One such punishment was infamia, a legal and social penalty. A person found guilty of certain crimes would be marked as infames, leading to a loss of certain rights and social standing. They could no longer vote, serve in the military, or hold public office. They were also excluded from certain social events, effectively turning them into social pariahs. In some cases, the punishment of infamia was combined with branding. The guilty party would have a mark burned onto their forehead, signifying their crime for all to see. This was not only a physical punishment, but a social one, as the branded individual would forever be marked as a criminal. While the punishments we have discussed so far have been largely physical, there were also psychological punishments in ancient Rome. One such punishment was damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This punishment was reserved for individuals who had brought disgrace upon themselves and the empire, such as disgraced politicians or emperors. Their statues would be destroyed, their names erased from public inscriptions, and all memory of them would be officially suppressed. In essence, they would be erased from history, a fate considered worse than death for many Romans who placed great importance on legacy and memory. This was a punishment that was not only designed to punish the guilty, but also to deter others from following in their footsteps. As we delve deeper into the annals of Rome's past, we find a fascinating array of punishments, each more bizarre than the last. These punishments, though brutal and often gruesome, provide a window into the mindset of the Romans, their social structures, and their ideas of justice. While it might be difficult for us to comprehend these practices, they were an integral part of Roman society, a testament to their complex and often brutal history. As we drift off to sleep, let us ponder on these strange and intriguing punishments and wonder at the peculiarities of ancient Rome. Our journey through the peculiar and often shocking punishments of ancient Rome brings us now to the concluding part of our first block. As we drift deeper into our exploration, let's delve into the notorious punishment known as damnatio ad bestias. This Latin term translates literally to condemnation to beasts, and it was, as the name suggests, a method of execution in which the condemned were killed by wild animals, often as part of a spectacle in the Colosseum or other arenas. The concept of damnatio ad bestias originated from as far back as 200 BC, when Rome was still a republic. Prisoners of war, slaves and criminals were often handed over to the claws and jaws of beasts as part of a spectacle that entertained the masses. But the punishment was not just about the physical torment. It was also about the humiliation, the complete stripping away of one's humanity, and the public display of their demise. As we settle deeper into our pillows, let's paint a picture of the Roman Colosseum. Imagine the deafening roar of the crowd, the scent of dust and sweat in the air, and the fearful anticipation that gripped those about to be thrown to the beasts. It was a spectacle that would have been both terrifying and captivating, a testament to the power and cruelty of Rome. The animals used in these gruesome spectacles varied. Lions, leopards, bears, and wild boars were common, but the Romans also imported more exotic creatures like elephants and hippopotamuses to add an extra level of novelty and excitement to the proceedings. The condemned were sometimes armed with a weapon, but more often than not, they were defenseless, their fate sealed. Interestingly, these spectacles also had a religious significance. They were often held during religious festivals and were seen as offerings to the gods. The Romans believed that the death of the condemned would appease the gods and ensure the prosperity of Rome. It's a stark reminder of how different ancient societies were and how far we've come in terms of our understanding of justice and human rights. The practice of damnatio ad bestias continued well into the period of the Roman Empire. It reached its peak during the reign of Emperor Trajan in the 2nd century AD. Trajan was known for his lavish spectacles, and it's said that he had 11,000 animals and 10,000 gladiators killed during his triumph in Dacia. But as the sun began to set on the Roman Empire, so too did the practice of damnatio ad bestias. The rise of Christianity and changing societal attitudes eventually led to the end of this brutal form of entertainment. The last known instances of damnatio ad bestias were in the 6th century AD during the reign of Emperor Anastasius. As we draw to the end of our first block, take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. The punishments of ancient Rome were gruesome and shocking, a far cry from the justice systems we know today. In their harshness, they serve as a reminder of the value of compassion, fairness, and human rights. Allow the echoes of history to wash over you, filling you with knowledge and understanding. Let these stories from the past guide you into a peaceful slumber as we prepare to delve deeper into history's intriguing tales in our next block. The journey through the annals of time continues, carrying us on a wave of knowledge and discovery towards the serene shores of sleep. In our last segment, we spoke extensively about the structure and organization of Roman law with its myriad of complexities and nuances. As we delve further into the labyrinthine world of Roman jurisprudence, We shall now turn our attention towards the more eccentric and bizarre aspects of Roman punishment. Roman law, while maintaining a veneer of justice and fairness, was not above resorting to unusual and arguably cruel methods of punishment for certain crimes. One of these peculiar methods of punishment was known as damnatio ad bestias, which roughly translates to condemnation to beasts. This punishment was reserved for the most heinous of crimes in Roman society, such as treason and murder. The guilty party was thrown into a pit or arena with ferocious animals, often lions or bears, and left to the mercy of these beasts. This was not a quick and painless death, but a drawn-out spectacle designed to entertain the masses. The Romans, known for their love of spectacle and entertainment, turned this gruesome punishment into a form of public amusement. Imagine, if you will, the grandeur and scale of the Colosseum, filled to the brim with eager spectators waiting for the games to begin. The air would have been thick with anticipation and excitement. Then, the unfortunate condemned, stripped of their dignity and humanity, would be thrust into the arena. The crowd would fall silent in anticipation before erupting into cheers and jeers as the beasts were released. It was a spectacle of horror and cruelty, yet it was seen as a fitting punishment for those who had committed the most egregious of crimes. Another bizarre punishment in ancient Rome was the act of poena culae. This punishment was reserved for individuals who committed patricide, the act of killing one's own father. The Romans considered this crime to be one of the most unnatural and heinous acts a person could commit. The punishment for such a crime was fittingly unusual. The convicted individual was sewn into a leather sack along with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape. The sack was then thrown into a river, drowning the criminal and the animals. The rationale behind this bizarre punishment is not entirely clear, but some historians believe that the inclusion of the animals was symbolic, each representing a different aspect of the abhorrent crime. In stark contrast to these brutal forms of punishment, Roman law also had a system of fines and penalties for lesser crimes. For example, theft was usually punished by a fine, the size of which was determined by the value of the stolen goods. If the thief was unable to pay the fine, they could be sold into slavery to repay the debt. Roman law was also unique in its application of corporal punishment. Unlike many other ancient societies, the Romans did not make extensive use of physical punishment such as flogging or mutilation. Instead, they preferred to use these punishments as a last resort for the most serious crimes. The Roman legal system was, in many ways, a reflection of Roman society itself, structured, orderly, but not without its dark and eccentric side. As we continue our exploration of ancient Roman law and punishment, we will delve deeper into the mindset and beliefs of the Roman people and how these influenced their judicial system. How did the Romans justify such cruel and unusual punishments? And what does this tell us about their society and culture? As we dive deeper into this topic, let's take a moment to reflect on how far we've come as a society and how our understanding of justice has evolved over the centuries. As we leave behind the spectacle of the Colosseum and the strange ritual of the poena culae, we find ourselves stepping further into the world of Roman law, with its many quirks and peculiarities. As we delve deeper into this intriguing period of history, let your mind wander through the corridors of time and let the echoes of the past lull you into a peaceful slumber. In the second section of our exploration into the peculiarities of ancient Roman punishments, we delve into the world of the amphitheatre. This grand stage was the setting for many public spectacles in Roman society, including public executions that were often woven into the theatrical performances of the day. This public spectacle of punishment was not only a form of entertainment for the masses, but also a stark reminder of the power and authority of the Roman state. One such punishment was the damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This was a form of capital punishment where individuals, often slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, were made to face wild beasts, often lions or bears, in the amphitheater. Unarmed and defenseless, these individuals were not expected to survive. The spectacle was less of a fair fight and more of a demonstration of Roman might, with the unfortunate individuals serving as a warning to those who dared to defy Rome's supremacy. Yet the Romans also took a more creative approach to this punishment. Instead of simply feeding the condemned to the beasts, they often incorporated the executions into elaborate mythological plays. The condemned would play the role of a character who, in the myth, was killed by a beast. For instance, an individual might be dressed as Orpheus, doomed to be torn apart by the Maenads, or as Actaeon, destined to be devoured by his own hunting dogs. The Romans would then release the appropriate animals into the arena, and the tragic myth would play out in reality. The crowd would watch, enthralled, as the narrative unfolded, blurring the lines between theatre, reality, and punishment. Another bizarre form of punishment was the poenacule, or punishment of the sack. This was a penalty reserved for parricides, those who killed their parents or other close family members. In this punishment, the criminal was sewn into a leather sack with an assortment of live animals, typically a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The sack was then thrown into the sea or a river. The symbolism of this punishment was deeply rooted in Roman culture. The variety of animals represented the chaos and disorder that the crime of parricide brought to the Roman societal and familial order. The water, meanwhile, served as a way to cleanse Rome of the heinous act. The Romans also had a unique punishment for those who committed sacrilege or violated the sanctity of the Vestal Virgins, priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. The guilty party was buried alive within the city limits. This was because Roman law prohibited both the spilling of blood and the execution of people within the sacred boundary of the city. As such, burying the guilty alive was a workaround that allowed the Romans to punish the crime severely while still adhering to their religious laws. The condemned was placed in an underground chamber with a small amount of food and water, symbolically delaying, but not preventing, their death. The Romans, in their creativity, also devised a punishment for those who committed treason. This was known as decimation. However, it was not the traitor alone who suffered. Instead, a group of individuals, usually a military unit or a cohort suspected of treason, was punished collectively. The group was divided into sets of 10. Each set would draw lots, and the individual who drew the shortest straw would be beaten or stoned to death by the other 9. This punishment was meant to foster unity and loyalty among soldiers, as the fate of one could so easily become the fate of all. These examples of ancient Roman punishment methods illustrate a society that was both brutal and deeply symbolic. Punishment was not simply about retribution or deterring crime, but about maintaining societal order and demonstrating power. Whether through the savage spectacle of the amphitheater or the symbolic rituals of the poenacule and live burial, the Romans turned punishment into a public spectacle, a theatre of power and control. As we continue our journey through the dark and often bewildering world of ancient Roman punishments, remember this was a society where power was absolute, and the state wielded this power with a heavy hand, using punishment as a tool to maintain control, instill fear, and communicate messages about societal order and norms. Through these punishments, the Romans created a theatre of power that was both brutal and mesmerizing. As we move into the next section, we delve deeper into this unique and often disturbing world, shedding light on the practices that have both fascinated and horrified us for centuries. In this section, we will delve deeper into the less-known aspects of Roman justice, exploring a range of punishments that might seem outlandish to our modern sensibilities, yet were an integral part of the Roman legal system. As we delve further into the labyrinthine corridors of ancient Roman criminal justice, let the intricate complexities and strange customs lull you into a state of calm and relaxation. Let's begin by exploring the punishment of damnatio ad bestias. This term, translated as damnation to beasts, refers to a form of capital punishment in which the condemned were killed by wild animals. This was typically carried out in a public spectacle, often as part of the gladiatorial games. To the Romans, this punishment was meted out to those they considered enemies of the state, including prisoners of war, convicted criminals, and early Christians who were regarded as a threat to the traditional Roman religious order. The spectacle was not just a means of execution, but also a demonstration of Roman might and authority, a warning to those who might oppose them. Next, we find siliqua collum incidere. This method involved the use of a sharp instrument, such as a knife or a razor, to make a cut or incision in the neck of the convicted person. This was a punishment reserved for those convicted of high treason against the Roman state. It was considered a dishonorable death, and the purpose was to send a stern warning to others who might consider betraying the empire. The third punishment we will examine is the poena culae. This was a particularly gruesome form of execution reserved for those convicted of parricide, the act of killing one's father. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack with a variety of animals, including a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. The sack was then sealed and thrown into a body of water. The symbolism of this punishment was potent, as the animals represented different aspects of treachery and deceit, and the act of submerging the sack was seen as a way of purging the crime from society. A less lethal, but nevertheless unpleasant punishment was the act of fustuarium. This was a form of corporal punishment used by the Roman military to discipline soldiers who had committed serious offences such as desertion or theft. The convicted soldier would be beaten by his fellow soldiers with wooden sticks or fusties until he was either dead or incapacitated. The harshness of this punishment served as a deterrent to other soldiers, upholding discipline within the ranks of the Roman army. Lastly, we have the punishment of decimation. This was a form of military discipline used to punish mutiny or desertion within a legion. 1 in every 10 men was chosen by lot and executed, often by their own comrades. The remaining soldiers were then forced to live outside the military camp and subsist on barley instead of the usual wheat rations. The fear of this harsh punishment helped maintain order and discipline within the legions. These punishments, while brutal and harsh by our modern standards, were considered necessary to maintain order and discipline in ancient Roman society. They served as deterrents, warning would-be offenders of the severe consequences they would face for their crimes. It's important to remember that the concept of justice and punishment has evolved significantly over the centuries, and what may seem cruel or excessive to us was considered the norm in ancient Roman times. As we traverse through the annals of Roman history, let the soft whisper of ancient tales lull you into a tranquil slumber. Leaving behind the hustle and bustle of modern life, let us surrender to the gentle embrace of a time long past. As we journey further into the past, we find ourselves immersed in a world that, while starkly different from our own, was a civilization that laid the foundations for many of the ideas and institutions we have today. Let the echoes of ancient Rome guide you into a peaceful and restful sleep. As we continue our journey through the annals of ancient Rome, let's delve into some of the most bizarre punishments their society had devised. Rome was a civilization that thrived on order and structure, and as such, they had a multitude of penalties in place to deal with those who disrupted the peace. One such unusual punishment was for the crime of parricide, the act of killing one's own parents or close relatives. The punishment for this crime was known as poena kule, a truly horrifying ordeal. The convicted would be sewn into a sack with a collection of animals, typically a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey, then thrown into the Tiber River to meet their watery end. This was a symbolic punishment, each animal representing a different aspect of the crime. The dog was a symbol of loyalty and fidelity. Being the most loyal of animals, it stood as a stark contrast to the actions of the person being punished. The rooster, with its loud crowing, stood for the outcry that the crime had caused. The snake represented the secretive, deceitful nature of the act, and the monkey, often seen as a mimic of humans, reflected the monstrous, unnatural act of the crime. The sack, water, and animals all combined to create a punishment that was a spectacle, a deterrent, and a demonstration of the Romans' creativity when it came to meting out justice. But the Romans didn't limit their punishments to humans. They also had a bizarre punishment for oxen and other animals that killed humans. The offending animal would be prosecuted, just as a human would be, and if found guilty, they would be sentenced to exile or death. In some cases, the animals would even be made to wear clothing and be paraded through the streets before their execution. This practice was based on the belief that animals were sentient beings, capable of understanding and respecting Roman law. Adultery was another crime that the Romans took very seriously, and the punishments could be quite severe. Under the reign of Augustus, the legislation known as the Lex Julia was enacted, which allowed the father of a woman caught in the act of adultery to kill both his daughter and her lover without fear of prosecution. Additionally, a husband who caught his wife in the act was allowed to kill her lover, provided he was of lower social status. If the husband chose not to kill the lover, he was required to divorce his wife within 3 days, and if he failed to do so, he could be charged with pimping. Another bizarre punishment was reserved for Vestal virgins who broke their sacred vow of chastity. As priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, these women were sworn to celibacy for a period of 30 years. Breaking this vow was seen as a betrayal of the city itself and was punished by burying the offending priestess alive. This was due to the belief that the spilling of a Vestal's blood would bring about terrible misfortune. One of the more peculiar punishments was the damnatio ad bestias, meaning condemnation to beasts. This was a form of capital punishment where the condemned were killed by wild animals, usually in the arena for the amusement of the public. This punishment was typically reserved for slaves, criminals, and Christians who were seen as enemies of the state. Treason, or maiestas, was considered the most severe crime in ancient Rome and was punished accordingly. The convicted traitor's property was confiscated, their memory was condemned, and their family was forbidden to mourn them. This was known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, which served to erase the traitor from history. The Romans also had a unique punishment for those who committed perjury or lying under oath. The accused would be thrown down from the Tarpeian Rock, a steep cliff on the southern side of the Capitoline Hill. This form of execution was quite literal in its delivery of justice, as those who figuratively fell from grace due to their dishonesty were made to fall physically as well. Lastly, let's talk about the punishment for tax evasion. While today it is seen as a white-collar crime, in ancient Rome it was a serious offense. Tax collectors who were caught cheating could be sentenced to work in the mines, which was essentially a death sentence due to the harsh conditions. As we can see, the Romans had a vivid imagination when it came to punishments. Whether it was being thrown into a river in a sack with animals, being buried alive, or being thrown off a cliff, these punishments served not only as a deterrent, but also as a demonstration of Roman power and creativity. In the heart of the Roman Empire, justice was a concept that held a different meaning than today. Let's delve into the complex, and at times, bizarre world of Roman law and its punishments. The Roman justice system was founded on the principle of pater familias, a cornerstone of Roman society, which translated to the father of the family. The pater familias held absolute authority over his family, and his powers extended to punishing members of his household. He could inflict punishments ranging from flogging to disownment to outright execution. The concept may seem rather extreme in our modern eyes, but it was an accepted part of Roman life and law. The Romans were also known for their use of corporal punishment. One of the most common forms was flogging, a punishment often used for slaves and sometimes for free men. Flogging was typically carried out with a whip known as a flagellum, which was often embedded with pieces of metal or bone to increase the severity of the punishment. But perhaps one of the most distinctive and harsh punishments in ancient Rome was crucifixion. This method was typically used for slaves, rebels, and the worst criminals. It was designed not only to be a long, torturous death, but also a public spectacle. The condemned person would be nailed or tied to a large wooden cross and left to die over several days. The body might even be left on the cross as a warning to others, underlining the brutality of Roman law and order. Yet, the Romans also implemented more creative forms of punishment. The poet Juvenal writes about a punishment where a criminal was sewn into a sack with a variety of animals, such as a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster, before being thrown into the river. This punishment, known as poenaculae, was reserved for parricides, those who killed their parents or other close relatives. Another unique punishment was being forced to become a gladiator. Gladiators were often slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Although being a gladiator could potentially lead to fame and fortune, it was a dangerous profession that often led to an early death. Ancient Rome was also known for its use of exile as a punishment. Exile could take two forms. The first, aquae et ignis interdictio, translated as interdiction of water and fire, was a form of temporary banishment where the person was not allowed to be within a certain distance of Rome. The second form, relegatio in insulam, was a permanent banishment to a specific location, usually an island. The Romans also utilized public humiliation as a form of punishment. This could involve the criminal being paraded around the city, being displayed in the stocks, or being forced to wear a toga pulla, a dark-colored toga that signified disgrace. In the world of Roman law, even the gods and goddesses were not safe from punishment. The punishment of deities, known as deorum injuriae, involved the destruction or desecration of a god or goddess's statue or temple. This punishment was used when the Romans believed that a deity had failed to protect the city or the emperor. As we can see, punishment in ancient Rome was a complex and multifaceted system. It was a world where family authority, corporal punishment, public humiliation, and even divine retribution played significant roles. It was harsh, brutal, and at times bizarre. But it was a system that was shaped by its society and its values, reflecting the strength and severity of the Roman Empire. As you drift further into your sleep, ponder on how much our perceptions of justice and punishment have evolved over time. As we delve deeper into the world of ancient Roman legal systems and their penalties, we come across a particularly bizarre punishment known as poenaculae. This punishment was reserved for those who committed parricide, the act of killing one's own parent or close relative. The Romans viewed this act as one of the most heinous crimes a person could commit, disrupting the family unit and the societal structure as a whole. Poenaculae, therefore, was designed to be as degrading and terrifying as possible to deter any potential perpetrators. Poenaculae, translated from Latin, literally means punishment of the sack, The condemned would be sewn into a leather sack, often along with an assortment of live animals. These animals generally included a dog, a rooster, a snake, and a monkey, each representing a different facet of the crime. The dog symbolized the domestic nature of the act. The rooster highlighted the crime's occurrence in daylight. The snake represented cunning and betrayal, and the monkey, a close relative to humans, symbolized the act of killing a family member. Once sewn into this ghastly bag, the convicted person would be thrown into a body of water, typically a river or the sea. This was not merely a form of execution, but a symbolic gesture. The Romans believed that by drowning the perpetrator, they were returning them to the womb of Mother Earth, thereby symbolically erasing their existence and the heinous act they had committed. The first recorded instance of poenaculae dates back to the 3rd century BC, during the Roman Republic era. However, it fell out of use during the later years of the Roman Empire, only to be revived again in the 9th century AD by Charlemagne, the king of the Franks. Charlemagne was greatly influenced by Roman law and incorporated many of its principles and penalties into his own legal system. While poenaculae was indeed a severe and terrifying punishment, it's important to note that it was rarely used. The Romans understood the importance of family and the impact such a crime could have on societal stability. Thus, the mere existence of such a punishment served as a deterrent to those who might consider committing such an act. In stark contrast to poenaculae, we find another unique punishment in ancient Rome, specifically designed for tax evaders. In a society where tax collection was vital for the maintenance of the vast Roman Empire, it's not surprising that tax evasion was considered a serious crime. However, the punishment for this offense was not as harsh as one might expect. Rather than being subjected to physical torture or death, tax evaders were made to sit on a special chair, known as the celesternium, in the public square. This was not just any chair, but a chair made of rough, unfinished wood designed to be uncomfortable. The evader was made to sit on this chair for a full day, exposed to the elements and the ridicule of passers-by. This punishment was more about shame and public humiliation than physical pain. It was a powerful deterrent, serving as a constant reminder to the public of the consequences of evading taxes. The celesternium was a symbol of societal order and compliance, demonstrating the importance the Romans placed on the community's financial contribution to the empire. As we delve further into the annals of ancient Roman punishments, we see a society that placed a high value on societal order and justice. From the terrifying poenaculae to the humiliating celesternium, the punishments of ancient Rome were designed to maintain order and uphold societal norms and values. While these punishments might seem bizarre and harsh to us today, they provide us with a fascinating glimpse into the mindset and values of one of history's most influential civilizations. As you close your eyes and prepare to drift off into sleep, imagine the bustling streets of ancient Rome. Hear the chatter of the marketplace, the clatter of chariots on cobblestones, and the distant murmur of the Senate in session. Feel the sun on your face, smell the aroma of freshly baked bread, and see the grandeur of the Colosseum in the distance. As you imagine this scene, let your mind wander and your body relax. Allow the stories of ancient Rome to lull you into a peaceful sleep filled with dreams of history and mystery. Rest well and sleep tight. As we delve further into the peculiarities of ancient Roman punishments, it is important to remember that much of what we know is derived from historical documents, which are often coloured by the perceptions and biases of their authors. We must thus interpret these accounts with a grain of salt and understand that the reality may have been different, or perhaps even stranger, than what we can glean from the written word. One such punishment was the poenaculae, or penalty of the sack, a grisly execution method reserved for those who committed parricide, the act of killing one's father. This was regarded as one of the most heinous crimes in Roman society, as the father held a sacred place in the family structure. The criminal was sewn into a leather sack with a variety of animals, including a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster. They were then thrown into a body of water, left to the mercy of the currents and the panicked creatures trapped inside the sack with them. The intent was not only to execute the criminal, but to erase them from the annals of history, leaving no trace of their existence or their crime. Another peculiar punishment was the damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This form of execution was often used against slaves, criminals, and enemies of the state. It was a spectacle, often held in amphitheaters, where the condemned were left defenseless against wild beasts. The Romans believed that by being devoured by animals, the criminal would be denied an afterlife. This spectacle also served as a form of entertainment for the masses, demonstrating the might and power of the Roman Empire. The Romans were also known to use decimation as a form of punishment. This method was used within the Roman army to punish units or large groups guilty of severe crimes such as mutiny or desertion. The word decimation comes from decimatio, which means removal of a tenth. The guilty soldiers would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would draw lots, and the soldier who drew the shortest lot would be beaten or stoned to death by the other 9. This brutal practice was intended to instill fear and maintain discipline within the ranks. The Romans also had a unique punishment for Vestal virgins who broke their vows of chastity. The Vestal virgins were priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, and were expected to maintain their purity for 30 years. If they broke this vow, they were condemned to death, but not by ordinary means. Since the Romans believed it was sacrilege to spill a Vestal's blood, these women were buried alive. They were entombed in an underground chamber with a small amount of food and water, symbolically absolving the Romans of their direct killing. One of the most bizarre punishments was reserved for those who committed sacrilege or blasphemy. The Romans believed in maintaining pax deorum, or peace of the gods, a state of harmony between Rome and the divine. Violating this harmony was considered a grave offense. The guilty were subjected to the taurobolium, a ritual where they were placed in a pit and a bull was slaughtered above them. The person was drenched in the blood of the bull, a spectacle that was believed to purify them of their sins. The Romans also practiced fustuarium, a punishment for soldiers who fell asleep on their watch. The guilty soldier was beaten to death with a club or a stick by his fellow soldiers. This brutal punishment served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and the severe consequences of neglecting one's duty. Each of these punishments, as bizarre as they may seem to us, served a specific purpose in Roman society. They were not only designed to punish the guilty, but also to deter others from committing similar crimes. They were a part of the Romans' broader system of maintaining law and order, and they reflect the values, beliefs, and norms of Roman society. As we continue to explore the peculiarities of ancient Roman punishments, we are reminded of the vast gulf that separates us from them, not only in terms of time, but also in terms of understanding and perception. What might seem bizarre or cruel to us was commonplace and accepted in their society. This stark contrast serves as a reminder of the complexity and diversity of human civilizations and the ways in which they evolve over time. In our next section, we will delve deeper into the motivations behind these punishments and explore how they were perceived by the Romans themselves. As we journey further into the past, let the soothing cadence of history lull you into a peaceful slumber as we unravel the mysteries of a civilization long gone. As we delve deeper into our journey through the annals of Roman history, we find the ancient Romans' creativity in administering punishment was not limited to their own citizens. They also devised some particularly brutal methods of retribution for captured enemy leaders and rebellious slaves. It is in these instances that we see the full extent of the Roman penchant for spectacle and deterrence. One infamous example is the punishment of the defeated leaders of the Gauls, a Celtic people who often found themselves at odds with the expanding Roman Empire. In the aftermath of the Gallic Wars, Julius Caesar famously took the Gaulish chieftain Vercingetorix as a prisoner. Vercingetorix was held in captivity for 5 long years before he was finally paraded through the streets of Rome during Caesar's triumphal procession. The grand finale of this spectacle was the execution of Vercingetorix by strangulation in the Tullianum, Rome's most notorious prison. This demonstration of absolute power and dominance over a defeated enemy was designed to instill fear and respect in Rome's potential adversaries. Another case of brutal punishment by the Romans was the crucifixion of slaves. This was a fairly common method of execution for slaves who were found guilty of serious crimes, such as rebellion or murder. The crucifixion process was not only incredibly painful, but also designed to be a slow and humiliating death. Victims were stripped naked and nailed or tied to a wooden cross or pole, left to hang in the open for days until they eventually succumbed to their injuries, exposure, or dehydration. The bodies were often left on display after death, as a stark reminder to other slaves of the consequences of disobedience. This was the fate that befell Spartacus and his followers after their failed slave revolt against the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC punishments. It is essential to remember that the Romans lived in a time where such brutal methods were considered necessary to maintain order and control over a vast and diverse empire. As we continue to explore the various punishments from ancient Rome, it becomes clear that these were not just arbitrary acts of cruelty, but rather they were deeply rooted in the Romans' understanding of justice, power, and order. In contrast to the brutal punishments meted out to enemies and slaves, it is interesting to note that the Romans also had a unique approach to punishing their own citizens. One such punishment was the penalty of infamia, a form of social ostracism that stripped a Roman citizen of their rights and privileges. This punishment was often imposed on individuals who had engaged in behavior deemed disgraceful or damaging to the Roman moral fabric, such as prostitution, adultery, or even performing on the stage, which was considered a lowly profession. Those subjected to infamia were not physically harmed, but the damage to their reputation and social standing was often a severe blow. As we weave our way through the labyrinth of Roman history, it is clear that the Romans had a complex and multifaceted approach to punishment. Their methods ranged from the brutally physical to the subtly psychological, reflecting a society that was constantly evolving and adapting to its own needs and challenges. As we drift off to sleep, let us take a moment to appreciate the intricacies of this ancient civilization and the valuable lessons it can still teach us about power, order, and justice. As we delve deeper into our historical journey, let's return to the thriving heart of the ancient world, Rome. In this section, we will explore one of the most peculiar and severe punishments imposed by the Romans, the infamous pena culli. This Latin term translates to the punishment of the sack and was a type of capital punishment specifically designed for one of the gravest crimes in Roman society, parricide. The act of a child killing their parent was considered an act of absolute rebellion against the natural order, a crime so unthinkable that the punishment had to match its perceived severity. The poena culli was a rather elaborate form of execution, as it involved a complex series of events. The condemned was not merely put to death, but the manner of their execution was a symbolic representation of their crime. The guilty party was firstly beaten with a rod of vergis sanguinis, or blood-coloured rods. This was followed by a rather theatrical process, which involved several animals and a sack. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack, along with a viper, a dog, a rooster, and a monkey. It was believed that these animals represented a mockery of the human form and its various vices. The dog, often a symbol of loyalty and obedience, was included as a stark reminder of the betrayal committed by the guilty party. The inclusion of a viper, a creature associated with deceit and treachery, was an embodiment of the traitorous act committed. The rooster, a creature that heralds the dawn, symbolized the awakening to the abhorrent crime, while the monkey, often a symbol of mischief, represented the chaos and disorder that the crime had caused. Once all the creatures were sewn into the sack, it was then sealed and thrown into the nearest body of water, usually a river or the sea. It was a symbolic act, intended to demonstrate the erasure of the individual from society, as if they had never existed. Their disappearance into the water was a final farewell, a chilling reminder to all who witnessed it of the Roman law's power and severity. This bizarre punishment, while undoubtedly cruel, was reflective of Roman attitudes towards crime and punishment. It was not merely about retribution or deterrence, but also about making an example of the offender. The spectacle of the penacule was designed to serve as a stark reminder of the consequences of crossing the moral and legal boundaries set by society. However, it's worth noting that despite its infamy, the penacule was not a commonly used form of punishment. In fact, it was reserved for the most heinous of crimes and was considered an extreme measure, even by Roman standards. Its rarity, coupled with its bizarre and brutal nature, has made it one of the most memorable and discussed punishments from ancient Rome. The penacule provides a fascinating glimpse into the mindset of the Romans. It illustrates their belief in the symbolic nature of punishment and their commitment to maintaining societal order at all costs. It is a testament to their belief in the inherent sanctity of family relations and the extreme lengths they were willing to go to protect these bonds. As we draw this section to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate the ancient Romans' complexity, their unique perspective on justice, and the role these played in shaping their society. It's a stark reminder that while we may find their punishments bizarre and cruel from our modern perspective, they were a product of their time and culture. A culture that was complex, diverse, and full of contradictions, much like the civilizations that have followed in its footsteps. In the next section, we will continue our exploration of ancient Rome's legal system and delve into the world of Roman trials, courts, and their interesting approach to litigation. But for now, let the echoes of the past lull you to sleep, carrying you on a journey through time and space to a Rome that was, in many ways, not so different from our world today. Good night, dear listener, and sweet dreams. Reaching back into the annals of history, we delve into the fascinating yet often brutal world of ancient Rome, a civilization known for its significant contributions to law, politics, engineering, and art. Rome was also infamous for its harsh and unusual punishments. For the Romans, laws were not just a system of rules to be followed, but a mechanism of social control, instilling fear and obedience among its citizens. As we delve deeper into this topic, let your mind wander across the centuries, picturing the grandeur and severity of Rome, its marble temples and bustling marketplaces, its senators and citizens, all under the watchful eye of the law. An important point to consider in the Roman legal system was the concept of poena, from which the English word penalty is derived. This was not merely a punishment, but a means of retribution, a way of restoring balance to a society disrupted by a criminal act. For minor offences, penalties could be as straightforward as fines or public humiliation. But for more severe crimes, the punishments could be remarkably severe and sometimes even surreal. One such punishment was damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This was a form of capital punishment where individuals, usually slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, were thrown into an arena to face wild animals, often lions, leopards, or bears. The condemned had little chance of survival and were left at the mercy of the beast, providing a morbid spectacle for the Roman populace. It's important to remember that for the Romans, this was considered a form of entertainment, an integral part of their culture. Then there was decimation, a punishment reserved primarily for soldiers guilty of serious offences like mutiny or desertion. The word decimation comes from Latin, meaning removal of a tenth. The cohort or legion guilty of the offence would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would draw lots, and the unlucky soldier who drew the short straw would be clubbed or stoned to death by his comrades. This brutal form of discipline served not just as punishment, but also as a stark warning to other soldiers. For parricide, the act of killing one's parent or close relative, the Romans devised a particularly symbolic punishment. The guilty party would be sewn into a sack with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and an ape, representing the natural world's condemnation of their act. They were then thrown into the river, ensuring a slow and terrifying death. This was known as poenacule, or punishment of the sack. Another unusual punishment was the fustuarium. This was a penalty for soldiers who fell asleep on the job or stole from their comrades. The guilty soldier would be beaten to death with a cudgel or a club, often by their fellow soldiers. This savage punishment was a stark reminder of the demands of military life in ancient Rome. The Romans also had a unique punishment for Vestal virgins who broke their vow of chastity. As priestesses of Vesta, goddess of the hearth, they were required to remain celibate for 30 years. If they broke this vow, they were buried alive, for the Romans believed it was sacrilegious to shed a Vestal's blood. A small chamber was prepared with a bed, a lamp, and a bit of food, after which it was sealed, leaving the guilty Vestal to her fate. Moving away from capital punishments, the Romans also employed more mundane forms of public humiliation. For instance, a tax evader would be strapped to a cart and paraded around the city, subjected to the mockery and derision of the citizens. The idea was to deter others from committing the same offence. Lastly, for those found guilty of treason, there was the punishment of aqua et panis, or water and bread. The offender would be kept in confinement, surviving only on bread and water until they wasted away. This slow, agonizing death was meant to symbolize the offender's betrayal to the state. In delving into the world of Roman punishments, one can see a blend of harsh retribution, public spectacle, and symbolic reparation. These punishments, as brutal as they were, reveal a society steeped in tradition and ritual, where the law was more than a system of governance. It was a fabric that held the Roman society together. As we drift away from this dark chapter of Roman history, we move closer to our world of dreams, leaving behind the echoes of a time when justice was swift and often brutal. As we continue our exploration of the most bizarre punishments from ancient Rome, we now turn our gaze to a lesser-known but equally intriguing form of retribution, the poenacule. This peculiar punitive measure was reserved for those who committed one of the most heinous crimes in Roman society, parricide, the act of killing one's own parent. Poenacule, or the penalty of the sack, was a punishment as symbolic as it was gruesome. The convicted individual was sewn into a leather sack, along with an assortment of animals, typically a viper, a dog, a rooster, and a monkey, before being thrown into a body of water, often the Tiber River. The Romans believed that this would not only punish the criminal, but also cleanse society of the horrendous crime by dissolving it in the sacred river. The choice of animals was not random. Each represented a particular vice that the Romans believed had led to the crime of parricide. The dog, known for its loyalty, symbolized betrayal. The monkey, a creature prone to mischief and deceit, represented treachery. The rooster, often associated with the new day and thus innocence, symbolized the loss of innocence. And the snake, a universal symbol of evil, represented the ultimate wickedness of the act itself. It's important to note that the Romans saw this punishment as more than just a physical torment. It was also a form of psychological torture. The condemned was not merely executed, but cast out from society, both literally and metaphorically. They were confined in the darkness of a sack, surrounded by creatures that represented their sin, and then submerged into the depths of a river, cut off from the world of the living. This was a powerful symbolic gesture, a message to the living about the gravity of the crime and the fate that awaited those who dared to commit it. Despite the seemingly clear-cut nature of this punishment, its application was not always straightforward. There are records of instances when the execution was postponed due to a lack of one or more of the animals required. In these cases, the convicted person was kept in prison until the necessary creatures could be procured. Such delays could prolong the mental agony of the condemned, making the punishment even more severe. Another fascinating aspect is the very nature of the sack used in the punishment. It was typically made of ox hide, a material chosen for its strength and durability. The sack needed to be robust enough to contain the struggling animals and the convicted person, and also withstand the force of the river. The use of ox hide was also symbolic, as oxen were animals of great significance in Roman culture, often associated with strength, diligence, and sacrifice. The poena culi, though not as well known as other Roman punishments, offers a fascinating insight into the ancient Roman legal system and societal values. It was a punishment that combined physical torment with psychological distress, and its use served not only as a means of retribution, but also as a powerful deterrent. While it may seem barbaric and bizarre to us, for the Romans, it was a fitting response to a crime considered to be the ultimate betrayal. It served as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of violating the sacred bonds of family and the severe retribution that awaited those who dared to do so. As we delve deeper into the most bizarre punishments from ancient Rome, it becomes evident that these were not merely acts of retribution, but also carefully constructed messages to society. They were designed to maintain social order and deter potential criminals, reflecting the Romans' complex understanding of crime, punishment, and social responsibility. And so, as we drift gently into slumber, let's ponder the intriguing complexities of Roman justice, where symbolism and reality intertwined in the most unexpected ways. The sun rises over the bustling city of Rome, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets and the grand marble structures. As we delve deeper into our exploration of the most bizarre punishments from ancient Rome, we turn our attention to the more psychological forms of punishment they employed. One such punishment was the infamous punishment of the sack, or poena culae in Latin. The Romans had a particular abhorrence for parricide, the act of killing one's own parents or close relatives. They considered it one of the gravest sins a citizen could commit, and the punishment for it was as unique as it was terrifying. The convicted person would be placed inside a leather sack, along with an assortment of live animals. Typically, these animals included a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, creatures chosen for their symbolism in Roman culture. The sack was then sealed before being thrown into the Tiber River or the sea. This punishment was designed not just to end the life of the sinner, but also to erase their existence from the collective memory of society. The Romans believed that water was a barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead. By submerging the guilty party in water, they were effectively severing ties with the world and banishing them to an aquatic underworld. This was not a quick death. The accused would be left to the mercy of the elements and the animals within the sack, making it a punishment as much psychological as it was physical. Another peculiar punishment was that of damnatio ad bestias, or damnation to beasts. This was a form of capital punishment where the condemned were thrown into a pit or arena with wild animals. These animals, starved and enraged, would most likely kill the condemned. This punishment was often reserved for slaves, criminals, and early Christians, and was a popular spectacle at the Roman games. The Romans saw it as a form of entertainment, a morbid fascination with the brutality of nature, and a symbol of the power and authority of the Roman Empire. It was also intended to serve as a deterrent, demonstrating the fate of those who dared to challenge the authority or disrupt the social order of Rome. The Romans also employed a punishment known as decimation, a term that has since evolved to mean the obliteration or destruction of a large portion of something. In ancient Rome, however, decimation had a very specific meaning and was a form of military discipline used by commanders to punish units or large groups guilty of capital offences such as mutiny or desertion. The word decimation comes from Latin meaning removal of a tenth. The soldiers would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would draw lots, and the soldier who drew the shortest straw would be executed by his 9 comrades, often by clubbing or stoning. The remaining soldiers were often forced to live outside the camp and given barley instead of wheat for their rations. Decimation was considered a drastic punishment, a last resort measure to restore discipline and order. It was cruel and brutal, but it was also extremely effective. The fear of decimation kept many Roman soldiers in line, ensuring their loyalty and obedience to their commander and their empire. As the sun sets over the city, casting an orange glow over the architectural triumphs and the winding streets, we are reminded of the darker side of Rome's history, a side that saw punishment as a means to an end, a tool to maintain control, and a spectacle to entertain the masses. As we continue our journey, we will delve deeper into this complex and fascinating society, exploring the nuances of their legal system and the ways in which they enforced their laws. As you drift off to sleep, let your mind wander through the streets of ancient Rome. Imagine the grandeur of the Colosseum, the bustle of the Forum, and the solemnity of the Senate. Let the narratives of the past guide you into a peaceful slumber, carrying you away on the wings of history. Next, we will continue our exploration, delving into the more obscure punishments, the ones that have been lost to time and only exist in fragments and whispers. We will journey deeper into the heart of Rome, uncovering the hidden corners of its history. So rest now and prepare for the journey ahead. Good night, dear listener. Continuing our journey through the labyrinth of ancient Roman justice, we find ourselves in the shadowy realm of unusual punishments. The Romans, known for their complex legal system, held a variety of penalties for different crimes, some of which were as bizarre as they were harsh. In this segment, we'll delve into the details of a few particularly peculiar penalties and the crimes that provoked such retribution. One such punishment was the poena culae, a punishment specifically reserved for those who committed the grave offence of parricide, the act of murdering one's parent, sibling, or other close family member. The Romans viewed this crime as an affront against the natural order, a perversion of familial bonds that deserved a unique and severe penalty. The offender would be sealed in a sack, often with a variety of live animals such as a snake, a dog, a monkey, and a rooster. The sack, with the guilty party and the animals inside, would then be thrown into a river, leaving both the human and the animals to their dreadful fate. The symbolism of the punishment was profound, a reflection of the chaos the criminal had introduced into the world through their heinous act. Another remarkable punishment in ancient Rome was the act of damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This penalty was typically reserved for slaves, enemies of the state, and early Christians during the persecutions. The condemned would be thrown to wild animals, usually in the arena as part of the public spectacle of the gladiatorial games. The spectacle served a dual purpose. It was both a form of public entertainment and a warning to those who might consider defying the Roman state. Yet, not all punishments were public or violent. Take the case of the acquiet ignis interdictio, or prohibition of water and fire. This was a form of outlawry where the accused was forbidden from using fire and water within the city limits of Rome. This meant they couldn't cook, warm their homes, or even draw water from the city's wells or fountains. The penalty effectively forced the guilty party into self-imposed exile, as living within the city under such conditions was virtually impossible. The Romans also had a punishment for bankruptcy known as edictus. If a debtor failed to pay their debts, they could be handed over to their creditor as a slave. The debtor would be bound in chains and could be kept in this state of servitude until the debt was repaid through their labour. This was a stark reminder of the importance of financial responsibility within the Roman society, where wealth and status were closely intertwined. The Romans also engaged in the practice of decimation, a military punishment in which 1 in every 10 soldiers would be put to death. This was done by drawing lots and was used as a form of discipline within the Roman army. The purpose was to instill fear and ensure obedience among the troops. The unfortunate soldiers who drew the short straw would be clubbed or stoned to death by their fellow soldiers, reinforcing the idea that the army functioned as a collective body and any disobedience or failure was a collective responsibility. Penalties such as these seem brutal and strange to us today, but they were a part of the fabric of Roman society. They reflected the Romans' values, their fears, and their complex relationship with authority, order, and justice. These punishments, as bizarre as they seem, served a purpose in the eyes of the Romans. They were tools of deterrence, meant to maintain social order and keep the populace in line. Yet, despite their severity, these punishments were not arbitrary. They were the outcome of a legal process, albeit a process that was deeply influenced by the social, political, and cultural realities of the time. The accused had the right to a defense, and the verdict was decided by a judge or a jury. The Roman legal system, despite its many flaws and cruelties, was a complex mechanism, one that reveals much about the society that created it. As we continue our journey through the history of ancient Rome, we'll encounter more of these peculiarities, each one a piece of a vast, intricate puzzle. They are reminders that the past, like the present, is a tapestry of human experience, woven from countless threads of triumph, failure, justice, and cruelty. They remind us that history, even at its most bizarre, is a reflection of the people who lived it, their beliefs, their fears, and their dreams. As we move towards the close of this part of our journey, let the gentle rhythm of our exploration lull you further into a state of relaxation. Let your mind wander through the corridors of the past, finding rest in the knowledge that history, in all its complexity, is a part of who we are, shaping our present and our future in countless subtle ways. Drift further into the sweet embrace of sleep, carrying with you the stories and lessons of a time long past, yet ever present in the echoes of our modern world. As we prepare to delve deeper into the annals of history, remember that each moment of our past has a purpose, a lesson, a story to tell. And with that, I bid you a peaceful journey into slumber, where the tales of yesteryears will blend with your dreams, creating a symphony of knowledge and repose. Good night. In the grand tapestry of ancient Rome's history, we find ourselves now turning our attention to a punishment that was reserved only for the most serious of crimes. This is the punishment of decimation, a term whose Latin root decimus means 10th. The very utterance of this word would send chills down the spines of Roman soldiers, for it was a punishment reserved specifically for them, and primarily used in instances of mutiny or desertion. Decimation was a collective punishment, enacted upon Roman legions or large groups of military men who had been found guilty of capital offences such as cowardice, insubordination, or mutiny. This form of punishment was unique in its intention to not only punish, but also to incite fear and maintain discipline within the ranks of the Roman military. The process was as brutal as it was simple. The condemned men would be divided into groups of 10. Each group would then draw lots, and the soldier who drew the short straw would be beaten or stoned to death by his 9 comrades. A harsh and brutal punishment indeed, but one that served its purpose. It was a stark reminder to all within the legion of the consequences of dereliction of duty. It's important to note, however, that decimation was not a frequently used punishment. It was deemed to be a last resort, used only when the integrity of the entire Roman legion was at stake. The reasoning behind this was simple. The Roman military machine depended on a strict hierarchy and a well-disciplined force. If a legion was unruly or insubordinate, it threatened the very fabric of the Roman military system. Decimation, therefore, was a tool used to restore order and discipline, sending a strong message to all who dared to challenge the might of Rome. Even though decimation was not a common punishment, there are several documented instances of its use. One such example dates back to 471 BC, during the consulship of Appius Claudius Sabinus Regalensis and Titus Quinctius Capitolinus Barbatus. A significant portion of the Roman army had engaged in an unauthorized withdrawal during a war with the Volsci tribe, and as a punishment, decimation was ordered. Another notable instance occurred during the reign of Emperor Augustus, who ordered the decimation of a legion that had engaged in rebellion. Despite its brutality, decimation was not universally accepted within the Roman leadership. Many military leaders and emperors saw it as too severe and damaging to the morale and effectiveness of the legions. In fact, by the 3rd century AD, the practice of decimation had largely fallen out of use, replaced by other forms of military discipline. As we delve further into the punitive measures of ancient Rome, it's worth noting the contrast between the collective punishment of decimation and the individual punishments we have explored earlier. This contrast speaks volumes about the Roman society and its values. Individual transgressions were dealt with severely, yet it was understood that a person's actions were their own and didn't reflect upon their family or community. Yet, in the military context, where unity and discipline were paramount, the transgressions of a few were seen as a reflection on the whole, leading to collective punishment. The punishments of ancient Rome, as brutal and harsh as they may seem to us today, provide us with a fascinating insight into a society that was deeply pragmatic, valuing order, discipline, and respect for authority above all else. These punishments, from crucifixion to decimation, were not simply about retribution. They served a purpose, acting as deterrents, maintaining social order, and asserting the power of the state. As we drift further into the night, let us ponder upon these aspects of a civilization long past. The moonlight casts long shadows, and the quiet darkness invites us to imagine a time of togas and centurions, of emperors and legions, of a vibrant society that has left an indelible mark on the annals of human history. As your eyelids grow heavy and the whispers of the past become softer, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful slumber. When dawn comes, we will continue our exploration of ancient Rome and its fascinating history. But for now, let the echoes of the past lull you into a calm and restful sleep. Good night. Ancient Rome, a civilization that spanned over 1,000 years, a civilization that was a beacon for architecture, government, warfare, and societal systems, also held a certain notoriety for its unique and often bizarre punishments. The ancient Romans were strict disciplinarians, believing strongly in the power of law and order. But the laws they instituted were often harsh, and the punishments meted out could be brutal, and frankly, quite strange to our modern sensibilities. In this section, we'll delve into some of the most unusual punishments that the Romans used as their means of maintaining discipline and societal control. One of the most bizarre punishments that the Romans employed was known as damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to beasts. This form of execution was a significant part of the cruel spectacle that was the Roman Games. Criminals, particularly those who had committed crimes against the state, were often thrown, unarmed and defenseless, into arenas to face wild beasts. These unfortunate souls would be mauled to death by lions, tigers, bears, or any other large dangerous animals that the Romans had on hand. This violent public display of punishment served as a stark reminder to the citizens of Rome of the severe consequences of disobedience. Then there was the punishment of poena culae, or the punishment of the sack. This punishment was reserved for those who committed the crime of parricide, or the killing of a parent. The guilty party would be sewn into a leather sack, along with a variety of animals including a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. The sack would then be thrown into the Tiber River, leaving the condemned to drown in the most horrifying and claustrophobic of ways. This punishment was symbolic, as the animals trapped in the sack with the guilty party represented the chaos and disorder that their crime had brought into the Roman society. Yet another strange and severe punishment was the fustuarium. This was a form of military discipline imposed on Roman soldiers who were found guilty of serious offences, such as desertion or theft. In this punishment, the guilty soldier would be beaten to death by his fellow soldiers using clubs or heavy sticks. This punishment was not only a brutal form of execution, but also served as a harsh lesson to other soldiers about the consequences of breaking the military code. Moving on to a slightly less violent, but no less bizarre punishment, is infamia. This was a form of civil punishment that involved a significant loss of personal reputation and social standing. This punishment was often handed down to those found guilty of crimes of moral turpitude such as adultery or fraud. The effects of infamia were far-reaching. The guilty party was stripped of their civil rights, they were barred from holding public office, and they were often shunned by society. The shame and social isolation that came with this punishment were considered severe penalties in a society that placed a high value on honor and public respect. Lastly, there was the decimation. This was a form of collective punishment employed by the Romans, particularly in the military. If a unit of soldiers was found guilty of cowardice or disobedience, 1 in every 10 men would be selected by lot and executed by his fellow soldiers. The remaining 9 would then be forced to live in disgrace, often denied regular rations, and forced to camp outside the protective walls of the military encampment. This brutal form of punishment served to instill fear and maintain discipline within the Roman military ranks. These punishments, while shocking to us, were part of the fabric of Roman society. They were a reflection of the Roman belief in the power of law and order, and of the harsh measures that the Romans believed were necessary to maintain that order. Although these punishments may seem cruel and unusual to us, they were not seen as such in ancient Rome. Instead, they were seen as an essential part of maintaining the strength and stability of the Roman state.